Okay, this is the next part in our series on classical, medieval, early modern, and Meiji period Japanese civilization, society, and culture. Today we will be reading excerpts from the Meiji Constitution of 1889. So last week we read the Charter Oath of 1868, which was published the year of the Meiji Restoration, the very beginning of the Meiji period. And this time we will be reading excerpts from the Constitution, which was created in 1889, and I think enacted in the following year. All right, so this served as the Constitution for Japan and Imperial Japan up through the end of the war. All right, promulgated on this English translation of the Meiji Constitution is taken from Modern Japan: A Brief History. 1962 by Arthur Tiedemann, and I'll put the link to that book in the description below. And also, once again, if you haven't memorized the dates of the major Japanese eras in Japanese history, do so immediately. I'll put the dates to those eras below in the description as always. All right, promulgated on February 11th, 1889. Okay, so it was promulgated in 1889. The Meiji Constitution was a major landmark in the making of the modern Japanese state and in Japan's drive to become one of the world's advanced, quote-unquote, civilized powers. Remember, the slogan for the Meiji period is Bunmei Kaika, or civilization and enlightenment, and by civilization, of course, they meant westernization. Drafted by Ito Hirobumi, underline this name, he's one of the most important figures of the Meiji period. Drafted by Ito Hirobumi, a group of other government leaders and several Western legal scholars, and a group of other government leaders and several Western legal scholars. So note that several Western legal scholars were involved in the drafting of this Meiji Constitution. The document was bestowed on the Japanese people by the Emperor Meiji and established Japan as a constitutional monarchy with a parliament called the Diet, the lower house of which was elected. Ito Hirobumi and his associates drew heavily on Western models and especially the conservative traditions of Prussia. Okay, so remember that Prussia served as the model in these early years of the Meiji period, as well as England, and not only in terms of government, but in military and in cultural affairs as well. In creating a constitution that reserved almost unrestricted power for the emperor while still permitting the creation of democratic institutions. So this is the tension that I mentioned in the video on the Charter Oath, is that it's the rhetoric of the time seeks to bolster and to strengthen democratic institutions and democratic sort of ideology, while at the same time seeking to strengthen the emperor and the imperial power. All right, here is this is an extended passage. Let me see how much we're dealing with here. We have 10 pages in all of excerpts, so I'm going to read it as quickly as possible, and there are study questions embedded within the text, so I'll read the study questions whenever we come to it, and we'll discuss those later in class. Excerpts from the Meiji Constitution of 1889, starting with the preamble. Here's the preamble. Having, by the virtue of the glories of our ancestors, ascended the throne of a lineal succession unbroken for ages eternal, desiring to promote the welfare of and to give development to the moral and intellectual faculties of our beloved subjects, the very same that have been favored with the benevolent care and affection and vigilance of our ancestors, and hoping to maintain the prosperity of the state in concert with our people and with their support, we hereby promulgate, in pursuance of our imperial rescript of the 12th day of the 10th month of the 14th year of the Meiji, a fundamental law of state, to exhibit the principles by which we are to be guided in our conduct, and to point out to what our descendants and our subjects and their descendants are forever to conform. The rights of sovereignty of the state we have inherited from our ancestors, and we shall bequeath them to our descendants. Neither we nor they shall in future fail to wield them, in accordance with the provisions of the Constitution hereby granted. We now declare to respect and protect the security of the rights and the property of our people, and to secure to them the complete enjoyment of the same, within the extent of the provisions of the present Constitution and of the law. Alright, so here are two study questions regarding about the preamble. Question number 1. According to the Meiji Constitution, what is the source of the emperor's legitimacy as ruler of Japan? And question 2. Who holds sovereignty over Japan in this constitutional system? Why is this important? Okay, so who holds the sovereignty? And we'll discuss this in class. Chapter 2. Rights and duties of the subjects. And we will read here Article 20 and Article 29. Article 20. Japanese subjects are amenable to service in the Army or Navy according to provision of law. Okay, so all subjects of the Japanese state are amenable, as it says here, to service in the Army or Navy. Article 29. Japanese subjects shall, within the limits of law, enjoy the liberty of speech, writing, publication, public meetings, and associations. So free associations, free speech is guaranteed here in Article 29. Questions 3 and 4. In the Meiji Constitution, the people of Japan are referred to as subjects, not as citizens. What is the difference between subject and citizen, and why is this difference significant? And question 4. What rights do Japanese subjects have under this document? Are these absolute rights? Discuss. All right, we'll talk about that in class. Chapter 3, the Imperial Diet. Article 33, the Imperial Diet shall consist of two houses, a House of Peers and a House of Representatives. Article 34, the House of Peers shall, in accordance with the ordinance concerning the House of Peers, be composed of the members of the imperial family, of the orders of nobility, and of those persons who have been nominated thereto by the emperor. The nobility is the kizoku, right? Article 35, the House of Representatives shall be composed of members elected by the people according to the provisions of the law of election. All right, then we have question number 5 here. In drafting the Meiji Constitution, Ito Hirobumi and his associates attempted to circumscribe means limit, remember, attempted to circumscribe the potential power of the elected lower house of the Diet, the House of Representatives. Article 71 was intended to ensure that the Diet could not shut down government by refusing to pass a budget. As it turned out, however, political parties in the Diet would later use Article 71 to successfully apply pressure to the emperor and his advisors. How do you think this was possible? Discuss. Okay, we'll talk about that in class. And continuing. All right. That was the abridged version of this worksheet that I read already. There's a longer version. I don't know if I should read the whole thing. I guess we could read the entire thing later in class. Let me just read the parts that have the chapter 1, which has to do with the emperor. Article 1 of Chapter 1. The Empire of Japan shall be reigned over and governed by a line of emperors unbroken for ages eternal. Article 2. The imperial throne shall be succeeded to by imperial male descendants, according to the provisions of the imperial house law. Underline imperial male descendants. This is a topic that's being discussed right now. Will Japan have a female empress in the near future? Article 3. The emperor is sacred and inviolable. Okay, underline this famous article here, and we'll look at the Japanese and see what the phrase is. You see this repeated in the Japanese propaganda and Japanese writings of the Meiji and Taishō and early Shōwa periods quite often. Article 4. The emperor is the head of the empire, combining in himself the rights of sovereignty and exercises them according to the provisions of the present constitution. Article 5. The emperor exercises the legislative power with the consent of the imperial diet. Alright, and then chapter 2 has to do with the rights and duties of the subjects. We'll go over that in class. Chapter 3 has to do with the imperial diet. Chapter 4, the ministers of state and the privy council. Chapter 5, the judicature, so the judicial system in chapter 5. The judicature shall be exercised by the courts of law according to the law in the name of the emperor. Chapter 6 has to do with finance. Chapter 7, supplementary rules. And then the final study question I'll read here. We'll go over all this, the longer extended passage in class. I won't read it all here and bore you all to death. Number 6. Question number 6. The Meiji Constitution has often been faulted for its vagueness regarding who would exert authority in the Japanese government, especially since it was well established that the emperor would not personally rule Japan. Does the Constitution make clear who will rule in the emperor's name? Are the Meiji oligarchs mentioned in the Constitution? What about a prime minister? How are ministers of state selected? Does the Diet have any constitutional role in the determination of a prime minister or cabinet? And to whom do the armed services answer in the Meiji Constitutional Order? To whom do the armed services answer according to the Constitutional Order? All right, we'll go over all of this in class. I will see you then. Goodbye.